The silence in Harold Peterson's ranch house in suburban Phoenix was deafening. Outside, the desert sun blazed with typical Arizona intensity, making the Christmas decorations on neighboring houses look almost absurd against the palm trees and cacti. Inside, the dining room table that had hosted 15 Christmas dinners sat empty except for a single-place setting and a small artificial tree that seemed to mock him with its cheerful blinking lights. At 68, Harold had survived Vietnam, built a successful plumbing business from nothing, and raised 3 children after his wife Linda died of ovarian cancer when he was 55. He'd put all 3 kids through college, helped with down payments on their first homes, and been the steady rock they'd always turned to in times of trouble. But sitting alone in his house on Christmas Eve, surrounded by wrapped presents that would remain unopened, Harold felt a defeat that cut deeper than any wound he'd received in the Mekong Delta 45 years ago. His phone sat silent on the kitchen counter. No calls from his daughter Amy in Seattle, no texts from his older son Robert in Denver, and nothing from his youngest, Michael, who lived just 20 minutes away in Scottsdale with his wife of 2 years, Jessica. The trouble had started when Michael brought Jessica home for the first time 18 months ago. She was everything Harold wasn't used to, a marketing executive from Los Angeles with designer clothes, a Tesla, and opinions about everything from his furniture, so outdated Michael, to his cooking, who still eats meat this much, to his war service. I just think there are better ways to solve international conflicts. Harold had tried to be welcoming. He'd listened politely when Jessica explained why his traditional Christmas dinner was problematic and how they should consider more inclusive holiday alternatives. He'd nodded when she suggested he convert his spare bedroom into a meditation space instead of keeping it as a shrine to Linda's memory. The breaking point had come 3 weeks ago during what Michael called a family conversation, but felt more like an intervention. Harold had made his famous chili, the recipe Linda had perfected over 20 years, and invited Michael and Jessica for Sunday dinner. "Dad," Michael had started, his voice carrying that careful tone people use when they're delivering devastating news. "Jessica and I have been talking about Christmas." Harold had looked at his youngest son, the boy he'd taught to throw a curveball, who'd cried in his arms when Linda died, who'd called him every week for the past 13 years and seen a stranger wearing his child's face. "Her family has this amazing tradition," Michael continued. "They rent a house in Aspen every year. Skiing, hot tubs, catered meals. They've invited us to join them." "That sounds expensive," Harold had said, trying to keep his voice level. "Oh, they're covering everything," Jessica had interjected, her voice bright with fake enthusiasm. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen are so generous. They really want to welcome Michael into the family properly." The way she said properly made Harold's chest tighten. As if 15 years of being Michael's father after Linda's death somehow wasn't proper enough. "What about our Christmas?" Harold had asked. "We always do Christmas here. Your mom's recipes, opening presents by the tree she picked out before she died." Jessica's expression had shifted to something that looked like pity mixed with distaste. "Harold, I think it's time to consider that maybe clinging to the past isn't healthy. Michael needs to build new traditions with his wife." The conversation had spiraled from there. Jessica had a prepared list of Harold's concerning behaviors. His refusal to redecorate the house, his insistence on keeping Linda's photos everywhere, his inability to move forward with his life. She spoke about him like he was a problem to be solved, rather than a father who'd sacrificed everything for his children. "Maybe this Christmas apart will be good for everyone," Michael had finally said, avoiding Harold's eyes. "A chance to evaluate our relationship and set healthier boundaries going forward." Healthier boundaries. The phrase had echoed in Harold's mind for 3 weeks. Apparently, calling your son twice a week was smothering, Asking about his job was intrusive. Wanting to spend holidays together was emotionally manipulative. Now, as Christmas Eve stretched into night, Harold found himself wondering if Jessica was right. Maybe he was just a lonely old man clinging to memories and traditions that no longer served anyone. Maybe his children were better off without his constant reminders of their mother, his stories about their childhood, his embarrassing displays of affection. The house felt enormous around him. Every room held memories of Christmases past. Linda in the kitchen making her famous sugar cookies, the kids racing down the hallway Christmas morning, family photos being taken by the tree year after year. Now those memories felt like ghosts haunting a museum no one wanted to visit. Harold walked to the kitchen and pulled out his phone. For a moment, he considered calling Amy or Robert. But Jessica had been busy this past year, and Harold suspected his other children had heard her version of events. Amy's calls had become shorter and less frequent. Robert's visits had stopped altogether. Whatever poison Jessica had been dripping into their ears about their controlling father seemed to be working. He set the phone down without dialing and walked to the living room window. Across the street, the Martinez family was arriving for their Christmas Eve celebration. 3 generations spilling out of cars, carrying covered dishes and wrapped presents, grandchildren running ahead to ring the doorbell. The scene was everything Harold's Christmas used to be and would never be again. A knock at his front door startled him. For a wild moment his heart leaped with hope. Maybe Michael had changed his mind. Maybe his children had come to their senses. But when Harold opened the door, he found Mrs. Chen, Jessica's mother, standing on his doorstep with a covered dish and an expression of determined kindness. "Mr. Peterson," she said in her soft, accented English, "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I brought you some Christmas Eve dinner." Harold stared at the small, elegant woman who'd never spoken more than polite pleasantries to him during the brief times they'd met at Michael and Jessica's wedding events. "Mrs. Chen, that's very kind, but may I come in?" she asked, already stepping past him into the foyer. "I think we need to talk about our children." Harold closed the door behind Mrs. Chen, his mind reeling from the unexpected visit. In the year and a half since Michael had married Jessica, he'd met Jessica's parents perhaps 4 times, brief encounters at engagement parties and wedding events where polite conversation had been limited to weather and traffic. Now, here was Mrs. Chen in his living room, setting a covered casserole dish on his coffee table with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to his own couch as if she were the host. "We have much to discuss." Harold remained standing, uncertainty making him defensive. "Mrs. Chen, I appreciate the gesture, but if Jessica sent you here to—" "Jessica sent me nowhere," Mrs. Chen interrupted, her voice carrying a steel Harold had never heard before. "Jessica does not know I am here. She would be very angry if she knew." Mrs. Chen was smaller than Harold remembered, probably in her early 60s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a navy blue sweater and practical slacks, nothing like the designer outfits Jessica favored. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, studied Harold with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Please sit, Mr. Peterson." "Harold, what I have to tell you is not easy for either of us." Harold lowered himself onto the edge of his recliner, the chair where he'd held each of his children during countless bedtime stories, where Linda used to curl up next to him while they watched old movies. Now it felt like sitting in a witness box. "First," Mrs. Chen began, "I want to say I am sorry about your Christmas. What my daughter has done is wrong." The words hit Harold like a physical blow. In 3 weeks of replaying that devastating conversation with Michael, he'd convinced himself that maybe Jessica was right. Maybe he was the problem. Maybe his grief over Linda had made him clingy and difficult. Hearing someone else acknowledge that Jessica's behavior was wrong felt like being offered water after days in the desert. "I don't understand," Harold said carefully. "Jessica said your family wanted to welcome Michael properly. That you'd invited them to spend Christmas with you in Aspen." Mrs. Chen's laugh was bitter. "There is no house in Aspen, Harold. There is no family gathering. Jessica and Michael are spending Christmas at a resort in Sedona, just the two of them." The revelation felt like being sucker-punched. Harold gripped the arms of his chair, trying to process what he was hearing. "She lied?" "She lies about many things," Mrs. Chen said sadly. "This is why I am here. Because lies have consequences, and those consequences are destroying families, both yours and mine." Mrs. Chen stood and walked to the mantelpiece where Harold kept framed photos of his children through the years. She picked up a picture of Michael at his college graduation, Harold's arm around his son's shoulders, both of them grinning at the camera. "Tell me about Michael before Jessica," she said. "What kind of son was he?" Harold's throat tightened with emotion. He was my buddy. After Linda died, he was only 22, but he stepped up, helped me figure out how to be alone, how to cook for myself, how to fill the quiet. He called me every Sunday morning for 13 years. We went fishing together, watched football, talked about everything. And now? Now he looks at me like I'm a burden, like every memory I share about his mother is a weight around his neck, like wanting to spend time with him is somehow unhealthy." Mrs. Chen set the photo down and returned to the couch. "Harold, what I'm about to tell you must stay between us for now, but you deserve to know the truth about my daughter." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, setting it on the coffee table between them. "Jessica is not the person she pretends to be, and this is not the first family she has tried to destroy." Harold stared at the folder as if it might explode. "What do you mean?" "Jessica was married before Michael. A man named David Barrett in Los Angeles. Good man, like your son. Close to his family, especially his widowed father." Mrs. Chen's voice grew heavy with regret. "Jessica convinced David that his father was manipulative, that his family was holding him back from his full potential. Within 2 years, David had cut off all contact with his father and siblings." "What happened to the marriage?" "It lasted 3 years. When Jessica grew bored with David, she left him for someone more successful. By then, the damage was done. David's father died alone 6 months later, heart attack. David tried to reconcile with his family for the funeral, but it was too late. The hurt ran too deep." Harold felt sick. The story was playing out exactly like his own situation, but with a tragic ending that made his blood run cold. "David called me last month," Mrs. Chen continued. "He saw the wedding announcement in the LA Times and wanted to warn me about Jessica. That is when I learned the truth about my daughter's pattern." She opened the folder and spread out documents on the coffee table. Phone records, emails, text messages, evidence of a systematic campaign to isolate and control. Jessica targets men who are close to their families, especially those who have lost a parent. She sees their grief and their bonds as weaknesses to exploit. She convinces them that their family relationships are unhealthy, that moving forward means cutting ties with the past. Harold picked up one of the emails, dated 6 months ago. It was from Jessica to Michael, outlining a relationship improvement plan that included reducing contact with father to once monthly and establishing clear boundaries around holiday obligations. "She's been planning this," Harold whispered. "The whole time she's been working to separate us." "Yes." And she has been very successful. But Harold, there is something else you need to know about why she chose your family specifically. Mrs. Chen pulled out another document. A real estate listing for Harold's neighborhood. Several properties were circled in red, including his own. Jessica works for a development company. This area is being targeted for commercial redevelopment. Your house and 6 others are sitting on land worth over $2 million if sold to developers. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Jessica's comments about the house being outdated, her suggestions that Harold downsize to a more manageable apartment, her subtle implications that keeping Linda's memory alive in the family home was preventing him from moving forward with his life. "She wants me to sell the house," Harold said, his voice barely a whisper. "She wants Michael to inherit it when you die. Or better yet, convince you to sign it over to him now for estate planning purposes. Once she has control of the property, the development company moves forward with their plans. Jessica gets a substantial commission." Harold felt the room spinning around him. His wife's death, his children's gradual withdrawal, his growing isolation, all of it had been orchestrated by a woman who saw his family as nothing more than a business opportunity. "How long have you known?" Harold asked. "I suspected something was wrong 6 months ago when Jessica started asking detailed questions about your financial situation, but I only learned the full truth 3 weeks ago when I hired a private investigator." Mrs. Chen's voice cracked slightly. "Harold, I am so ashamed of what my daughter has become. Her father and I raised her to be better than this." "Does your husband know?" "He died 5 years ago. Cancer." Mrs. Chen wiped her eyes with a tissue. Jessica changed after that. The grief, the anger, it twisted something inside her. She became cold, calculating. She sees other people's love for their families as a weakness to be exploited because she cannot feel that love herself anymore. Harold looked around his living room, at Linda's favorite chair, at the family photos Jessica had criticized, at the Christmas tree that would sit unlit and unnoticed tomorrow morning. Everything Jessica had attacked as unhealthy was actually what made his life meaningful. She'd tried to convince him that love was a weakness, that memories were burdens, that family was an obligation to be escaped rather than a gift to be treasured. "What do I do?" Harold asked. "Michael won't listen to me. He thinks I'm the problem." Mrs. Chen stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Martinez family's house where lights were still glowing warm and golden in every room. "We fight for our children," she said simply, "both of them, because Jessica is as much a victim of her own behavior as Michael is. She has lost her way. And if we do nothing, she will destroy another family and another man who loves his father." She turned back to Harold, her expression determined. "I have a plan, but it will require courage from both of us, and it will require trusting that love is stronger than manipulation." "What kind of plan?" Mrs. Chen smiled for the first time since arriving. "Christmas morning, Harold. Christmas morning, we give our children a gift they are not expecting. The truth." Harold stared at Mrs. Chen across his living room, the weight of her revelations settling over him like a heavy blanket. Outside, the desert evening had grown cool, and through his windows he could see Christmas lights twinkling in his neighbors' yards. A cheerful contrast to the devastating conversation unfolding in his darkened house. "What exactly are you proposing?" Harold asked, his voice hoarse from the emotional roller coaster of the past hour. Mrs. Chen returned to the couch and pulled out her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be text messages. "Jessica believes she has complete control over the situation. She thinks you are isolated, defeated, and ready to give up. She has no idea that I know the truth about her schemes." She showed Harold her phone screen. These are messages from Jessica over the past 2 weeks. She has been asking me detailed questions about Michael's inheritance prospects, about whether I think you might be willing to downsize your living situation. Harold read the messages, each one more manipulative than the last. Jessica was asking Mrs. Chen to help convince Harold that moving to a senior living facility would be better for everyone involved. She'd even researched specific communities and their costs, presenting herself as a caring daughter-in-law worried about Harold's well-being. "She's been planning this for months," Harold said, disgust evident in his voice. "Longer than that. I found evidence that she started researching your neighborhood's development potential before she even met Michael. The dating app they met on, she had specifically set her radius to include your area." The revelation was like a knife to Harold's chest. His son's romance, their whirlwind courtship, even their wedding, all of it had been calculated moves in Jessica's scheme to acquire valuable real estate. "But here is what Jessica does not know," Mrs. Chen continued, her voice taking on a strategic tone that reminded Harold of military briefings from his army days. "Michael still loves you, despite everything she has done to poison his mind. He's not lost yet." "How can you be sure?" Mrs. Chen smiled sadly. "Because 3 days ago he called me crying. He thinks I don't speak English well enough to understand complicated emotions, so he feels safe talking to me. He is miserable, Harold. He misses you terribly. He knows something is wrong with his marriage, but he cannot identify what." She pulled out another document, a printout of Michael's credit card statements that she'd apparently obtained through methods Harold didn't want to question. "Michael has been buying you Christmas presents," she said. "Expensive ones, a new fishing rod, a gift certificate for that restaurant where you and Linda used to go for anniversaries, a photo book of family memories. He purchased them all 2 weeks ago, the same day Jessica told him they were going to Aspen." Harold's eyes filled with tears. "He still cares." "Of course he cares. You are his father. But Jessica has convinced him that caring about you is a weakness, that your relationship is somehow damaged and needs space to heal. She has twisted his love into guilt." Mrs. Chen stood and walked to Harold's mantelpiece again, this time picking up a photo of Linda holding baby Michael at the hospital. "Tomorrow morning, Jessica expects you to spend Christmas alone, defeated and ready to consider her suggestions about selling this house. She expects Michael to enjoy their romantic getaway while feeling slightly guilty, but ultimately relieved to be free from family obligations. And instead, we are going to give them both a Christmas they will never forget." Mrs. Chen's smile had a determined edge that made Harold understand where Jessica had inherited her strategic mind, though Mrs. Chen was using hers for healing rather than harm. She returned to her folder and pulled out a detailed timeline written in neat handwriting. "Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., Michael and Jessica will return from Sedona. Jessica told him they needed to come back early to check on her sick mother." Another lie. "She wants to be here when Michael calls you to wish you Merry Christmas, to monitor that conversation and ensure it stays brief and distant." "How do you know their schedule?" "Because Jessica tells me everything, thinking I'm a foolish old woman who doesn't understand her schemes. She wants me to be available tomorrow morning in case Michael needs emotional support after dealing with his difficult father." Mrs. Chen spread out what appeared to be a floor plan of Michael and Jessica's house in Scottsdale. "At 10 a.m. you will arrive at their house. You will bring all the Christmas presents you bought for them, and you will act as if nothing has changed, cheerful, loving, excited to see your son. Jessica will try to get rid of me immediately. Yes, she will. She will claim I am sick and need their help. She will say they have other plans. She will try every manipulation in her playbook to make your visit brief and uncomfortable. Mrs. Chen pulled out another document. This one appeared to be a recording device app downloaded to her phone. But while she is busy trying to manage the situation, I will be recording everything from the kitchen where she cannot see me. Every lie, every manipulation, every cruel comment she thinks Michael cannot hear. Harold studied the plan, impressed despite himself by its thoroughness. And then we present Michael with a choice. Not an ultimatum, not a demand that he choose between you and his wife, but simply the truth about what has been happening to his family. We let him decide what kind of man he wants to be. The plan was risky. If it backfired, Harold might lose his son permanently. But as he sat in his empty house on Christmas Eve, surrounded by unopened presents and abandoned traditions, he realized he had already lost Michael to Jessica's manipulations. At least this way, he would be fighting for his son instead of quietly surrendering. What about the other evidence? The information about her previous marriage, the development company, all of it? We save that for later if needed. Tomorrow is about giving Michael a chance to see Jessica's behavior clearly, without the filter of her explanations and justifications. Sometimes the truth is most powerful when people discover it themselves. Mrs. Chen began gathering her documents back into the folder. Harold, I need you to understand something. This plan may work perfectly, or it may fail completely. Jessica is very skilled at manipulation. She may convince Michael that we are the ones being manipulative, that this is all some conspiracy against their happiness. I understand. But regardless of what happens tomorrow, you will know that you fought for your son. You will know that you tried to break through the web of lies she has woven around your family, and that matters, even if the outcome is not what we hope for. Harold looked around his living room one more time, at the empty chairs where his children used to sit, at the silent phone that used to ring with calls from his family, at the Christmas tree that would normally be surrounded by loved ones tomorrow morning. Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me instead of supporting your daughter? Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photo of Linda and baby Michael in her hands. Because I am also a mother who has lost her way, she said finally. I enabled Jessica's behavior for years, making excuses for her cruelty because I was afraid of losing her like I lost my husband. But watching her destroy your family has shown me that sometimes loving someone means refusing to participate in their destruction of others. She set the photo back on the mantelpiece with careful reverence. Your Linda would have fought for her son, would she not? Harold's voice was thick with emotion. Every day of her life. Then tomorrow we fight for both our children. We fight for the son you are losing and the daughter I have already lost. And maybe if we are very lucky and very brave, we will find a way to save them both. Mrs. Chen gathered her coat and headed toward the door, leaving behind the casserole dish and the folder of evidence. Get some sleep, Harold. Tomorrow we remind our children what real love looks like. Christmas morning arrived crisp and clear in Phoenix, the desert sun painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink that would have taken Harold's breath away under different circumstances. Instead, he stood in his bathroom at 8 a.m., staring at his reflection and trying to convince himself he had the courage to go through with Mrs. Chen's plan. The face looking back at him seemed older than his 68 years. The past 3 weeks had carved new lines around his eyes, and his usually neat silver hair looked disheveled despite his attempts to comb it. He thought about Linda and what she would say if she could see him now, probably something about straightening his shoulders and remembering that love was worth fighting for, no matter how scary the battle. Harold dressed carefully in the red sweater Linda had bought him for their last Christmas together, the one Michael always said made him look like Santa Claus. He loaded his truck with the wrapped presents he'd bought months ago, before Jessica's campaign had isolated him from his own family. Each package represented hope for a Christmas that had been stolen from him, but maybe, just maybe, could still be reclaimed. At 9:45 a.m., Harold pulled into the driveway of Michael and Jessica's modern stucco house in Scottsdale. The neighborhood was pristine and expensive, all perfectly manicured lawns and imported palm trees that probably cost more than Harold's monthly Social Security check. It was the kind of place Jessica belonged, and Harold definitely didn't, which had been made clear to him on every previous visit. He could see Michael's truck in the garage and Jessica's Tesla parked behind it. They were home from their fake Aspen trip, just as Mrs. Chen had predicted. Harold took a deep breath, grabbed the presents from his truck bed, and walked to the front door. Michael answered on the second knock, and Harold's heart nearly broke at the sight of his youngest son. Michael looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a hollow expression that spoke of sleepless nights and suppressed guilt. When he saw Harold standing on his doorstep with an armload of Christmas presents, his face cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been relief. "Dad! What are you? I thought you were spending Christmas alone." "By choice." "Changed my mind," Harold said with forced cheerfulness. "Figured Christmas morning without my kids was no Christmas at all. Can I come in?" Michael hesitated, glancing over his shoulder toward the kitchen, where Harold could hear the familiar sound of Jessica's voice, speaking in rapid, agitated tones on the phone. "Dad, this isn't really a good time. Jessica's mom is sick and we're trying to figure out if we need to fly to L.A. "Oh, Mrs. Chen's not sick," Harold said casually, pushing past Michael into the foyer. "She's actually in your kitchen right now, helping Jessica figure out how to get rid of me as quickly as possible." The color drained from Michael's face. "What?" From the kitchen came the sudden sound of a phone being slammed down, followed by Jessica's voice raised in anger. "What do you mean he's here? How did he even know we were back?" Harold set his presents down on the pristine white entryway table and looked directly into his son's eyes. "Michael, we need to talk. Really talk." Without Jessica managing the conversation. "Dad, I don't understand what's happening." "I know you don't, and that's the problem." Jessica appeared in the kitchen doorway like a storm cloud in designer yoga wear, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, despite the early hour. Behind her, Harold caught a glimpse of Mrs. Chen sitting calmly at the kitchen island, her phone positioned discreetly to record the upcoming conversation. "Harold," Jessica said with fake warmth that didn't reach her eyes, "what a surprise. We weren't expecting you." "I can see that," Harold replied evenly. "How was Aspen? I heard the skiing was fantastic this year." Jessica's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "It was wonderful. Such a beautiful family tradition the Chens have. You understand?" "Actually, I do understand. Better than you think." Michael was looking back and forth between them like a tennis spectator, clearly sensing undercurrents he couldn't identify. "Can someone please explain what's going on here?" Harold turned to his son, 33 years of love and pride evident in his voice. "What's going on, son, is that your wife has been lying to both of us. There was no trip to Aspen. There was no Chen family gathering. You spent Christmas Eve at a resort in Sedona, while Jessica convinced you that abandoning your father on Christmas was somehow healthy for our relationship." "That's ridiculous," Jessica said quickly. "Harold, I think your isolation is affecting your thinking. Maybe we should discuss getting you some help." "Help like convincing me to sell my house to your development company friends?" Harold interrupted. "Help like moving me into a senior facility so you and Michael can inherit valuable real estate." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stared at his wife with growing understanding and horror, while Jessica's face cycled through denial, anger, and calculation. "Michael, don't listen to him," Jessica said. her voice taking on the soothing tone she used during her manipulations. "This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking I've been trying to protect you from. Your father is becoming unstable." "Am I?" Harold pulled out his phone and played a recording Mrs. Chen had made of Jessica's phone conversations about the development project. Jessica's voice filled the room, discussing lot values, demolition timelines, and commission structures with clinical detachment. Michael sank onto the white leather couch, his head in his hands. "Jesus, Jessica! What is this?" "It's a business opportunity that benefits everyone," Jessica said, her mask finally slipping to reveal the cold calculator beneath. "Your father is sitting on property worth $2 million while living alone in a house too big for him. It makes financial sense for everyone involved." "It makes sense for you," Harold said quietly. "But what about Michael? What about the fact that you've systematically destroyed his relationship with his family to get access to that property?" Mrs. Chen appeared in the kitchen doorway, her phone still recording. "Jessica, perhaps you should tell Michael about David Barrett." "Who's David Barrett?" Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jessica's face went white. "Mother, don't." "David was Jessica's first husband," Mrs. Chen said calmly. "She used the same methods to separate him from his family. His father died alone because Jessica convinced David that family relationships were unhealthy. When she got bored with David, she left him for someone more successful." Michael looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "Is that true?" "Michael, you have to understand. That situation was completely different. Is it true?" Michael's voice was stronger now, demanding honesty. Jessica stared at her husband for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and adopted the defiant posture of someone who'd been caught, but refused to feel guilty. "Yes, it's true. But David was weak. He let his family hold him back from his potential. I was trying to help him become the man he could be. By cutting him off from everyone who loved him? By freeing him from unhealthy dependencies? The same thing I've been trying to do for you." Jessica's voice was rising now, her careful facade cracking completely. "Your father's grief over your mother has made him clingy and manipulative. He uses guilt and obligation to control you. I've been trying to help you see that." Harold watched his son process this revelation, seeing the exact moment when Michael understood how thoroughly he'd been manipulated. The realization played across his face like physical pain. "All those conversations about setting boundaries," Michael said slowly. "About reducing contact with Dad, about skipping family traditions. That wasn't about my mental health. That was about isolating me from my family so you could get your hands on Dad's property. It was about building a life together without interference from the past." Jessica shot back. "But clearly you're too weak to appreciate what I was trying to give you." The word weak hung in the air like a slap. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Jessica, you are my daughter and I love you, but what you have done to this family is unforgivable. Love is not weakness. Family is not a burden to be discarded, and using people's grief and loneliness to manipulate them is not helping anyone." Jessica turned on her mother with fury. "You've ruined everything. I had him exactly where I needed him, and you've destroyed months of work." "Months of work," Michael repeated, his voice hollow. "That's what our marriage was to you. Work." Harold moved to sit beside his son on the couch, carefully placing a hand on Michael's shoulder. "Son, I need you to know something. Every day for the past 3 weeks, I've been wondering if Jessica was right about me. If my grief over your mother had made me selfish and demanding, if wanting to spend time with my children was somehow unhealthy." Michael looked up at his father with tears in his eyes. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't see it clearly. She made everything seem so reasonable, so caring. That's what skilled manipulators do, Mrs. Chen said sadly. They take our love and turn it into a weapon against us. They make us question our own hearts. Jessica gathered her purse and phone, her expression cold as winter. I'm not going to stand here and be attacked by people who don't understand adult relationships. Michael, when you're ready to have a mature conversation about our future, you know where to find me. She headed toward the door, then turned back with a final cruel smile. Oh, and Michael, those Christmas presents your father is so proud of. They were bought with Social Security money while he sits on $2 million in real estate. Think about what that says about his priorities. After Jessica left, the house fell silent except for the quiet sound of Michael crying. Harold pulled his son close, the way he had when Michael was small and the world had hurt him. I'm sorry, Dad, Michael whispered. I'm so sorry I let her convince me you were the problem. You don't have anything to apologize for, Harold said firmly. She was very good at what she did, but it's over now. Mrs. Chen approached them with 2 cups of coffee, settling into a chair across from the couch. The question now is, what comes next, for all of us? Michael wiped his eyes and looked at his father. I want to come home for Christmas dinner, if you'll have me. I want to open presents and eat too much food and listen to your stories about Mom. I want to remember who I used to be before Jessica made me ashamed of loving my family. Harold felt his own tears starting. Son, there's nothing in this world I want more. But I need to understand something first, Michael continued. Mrs. Chen, what happens to Jessica now? I can't just abandon her, even after everything she's done. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee cup. Jessica is going to have to learn that actions have consequences. She will lose this marriage, this house, this life she built on manipulation and lies. But maybe, if she is very lucky, she will also find her way back to the daughter I raised, the one who knew how to love without controlling, how to build without destroying. Will you be okay? Michael asked her. I will grieve for the daughter I thought I knew, and I will hope for the daughter she might become again. But mostly, I will be grateful that we stopped her before she destroyed another family completely. 3 hours later, Harold's dining room table was set for 4 instead of 1. Michael was in the kitchen, helping with Linda's traditional Christmas dinner recipes, while Mrs. Chen sat in Linda's favorite chair, sharing stories about Jessica's childhood that helped them all understand how a loving daughter had become a manipulative predator. Tentar novament, J. The turkey was golden brown, filling the house with the familiar aroma that had marked every Christmas since Linda was alive. Harold stood in his kitchen doorway, watching Michael move around the space with practiced ease. Knowing exactly where every pot and utensil belonged, it was as if the past 18 months of estrangement had never happened. You remember how Mom always burned the rolls? Michael said, checking the oven timer. She'd get so focused on making everything else perfect that she'd forget about them until the smoke alarm went off. Every single year, Harold laughed, the sound feeling rusty from disuse. And every year she'd say, next Christmas I'll remember, but she never did. Mrs. Chen appeared from the living room where she'd been setting out the gifts Harold had bought months ago, in hopeful anticipation of this very moment. In our house, my husband always forgot to start the rice cooker. 23 years of marriage, and every holiday dinner was delayed 30 minutes while we waited for rice. The casual sharing of family memories felt like a miracle to Harold. For months, Jessica had made him feel like his stories about Linda were burdens, unwelcome intrusions into Michael's new life. Now, in the warm glow of Christmas afternoon, those memories felt like gifts being unwrapped and shared. Dad, Michael said, pulling the rolls from the oven, perfectly golden, not burned at all, I need to ask you something difficult. Harold's stomach tightened. What is it? The money. Jessica's accusation about you sitting on $2 million while living on Social Security. Is there truth to that? Harold sighed, knowing this conversation was inevitable. Yes and no. The house is worth that much because of the development pressure in this area. But it's not liquid money, son. It's the home where you were raised, where your mother died, where every important memory of our family lives. Michael set down the hot pan and turned to face his father. I would never ask you to sell this house. Ever. Even if we were both broke and living in a cardboard box, I wouldn't ask you to give up Mom's memory for money. Jessica didn't see it that way. Jessica saw dollar signs where she should have seen a family legacy. Michael's voice carried a bitter edge. She couldn't understand that some things are worth more than their market value. Mrs. Chen joined them in the kitchen, carrying the gravy boat Linda had used for every special dinner. Harold, may I ask you something personal? Of course. What will happen to this house when you're gone? Have you thought about the future? Harold leaned against the counter, considering the question he'd been avoiding for 2 years. Honestly, I always assumed I'd leave it to my children equally. The house and everything in it. But lately, I've been wondering if that's fair to them. Property taxes, maintenance, the emotional burden of deciding what to do with it all. Don't you dare, Michael said firmly. Dad, this house isn't a burden. It's our history. Amy and Robert and I, we all grew up here. We all have memories in every room. When the time comes, and I hope that's many years from now, we'll figure it out together, as a family. The word family hung in the air between them, heavy with new meaning after months of it being used as a weapon against their relationship. Speaking of family, Harold said, we should call your brother and sister. They need to know what really happened here. They need to know that Jessica's version of events wasn't the whole truth. Michael's face darkened. God, Dad, what did she tell them? I know Amy and Robert have been distant lately. She's been busy, Mrs. Chen said grimly. I heard her on the phone several times, talking to people about your father's concerning behavior and your need for space to process your relationship. She was very convincing. Harold pulled out his phone, his heart racing with anxiety. He hadn't spoken to Amy in 6 weeks, or Robert in even longer. Jessica's poison had spread far beyond just Michael. What if they don't believe us? Harold asked. What if Jessica has done too much damage? Then we keep trying, Michael said simply. We keep showing up, keep telling the truth, keep loving them until they can see past the lies, just like Mrs. Chen did for us. Michael moved to his father's side and put an arm around his shoulders. Dad, I'm going to call them both right now, on speakerphone, and I'm going to tell them exactly what happened here today. They need to hear from me that I was wrong, that you were never the problem. What if they hang up? Then we'll call back, and if they hang up again, we'll call back again. Family doesn't give up on family, even when family gives up on themselves. Harold felt tears threatening again as he watched his son, his baby, the little boy he'd taught to ride a bike and throw a curveball, take charge of healing their fractured family with the strength Linda had always said he possessed. Michael dialed Amy's number in Seattle, putting the phone on speaker as they all gathered around the kitchen island. Michael? Amy's voice sounded surprised and cautious. I wasn't expecting to hear from you today. How was your Christmas with Jessica's family? That's what I'm calling about, Amy. I need to tell you something important about Jessica, about Dad, about everything that's been happening to our family. For the next 45 minutes, Michael told the story. Jessica's lies, her manipulation, the real reason behind the family's growing estrangement. Harold listened to his son defend him with a fierce love that he'd thought was lost forever, explaining to Amy how their father had been systematically isolated and portrayed as the villain in his own family's story. Oh my God, Amy whispered when Michael finished. "Michael, I'm so sorry. Jessica called me last month and told me Dad was becoming possessive and demanding. She said you were struggling to set healthy boundaries and needed family support for your decision to limit contact." She lied, Amy, about everything. Dad never did anything wrong except love us too much and refuse to hide his grief over Mom. "Where is Dad now?" Amy asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm right here, sweetheart," Harold said, leaning closer to the phone. "And I love you, no matter what anyone has told you about me." The sound of Amy crying came clearly through the speaker. "Daddy, I'm so sorry. I believed her. I thought I was helping you and Michael by giving you space. I thought I was being supportive." "You were being a good sister," Harold said gently. "You were trying to help your brother. That's exactly what a good sister should do." "I'm coming home," Amy said suddenly. "Tomorrow. I'm getting on the first flight I can find. We need to be together. We need to fix this." And the call to Robert in Denver went similarly, with Michael once again patiently explaining the truth while their older brother processed the revelation that their family's breakdown had been orchestrated by someone they'd all trusted. Robert's anger was volcanic when he understood how thoroughly they'd all been manipulated. "I want to kill her," Robert said bluntly. "I want to drive down there and confront that woman about what she's done to our family." "Robert, no," Harold said firmly. "We handle this with dignity. We rebuild what she tried to destroy, but we don't lower ourselves to her level." "Dad's right," Michael added. "The best revenge against Jessica is showing her that she failed, that our family is stronger than her manipulation." As they finished the calls and sat down to their Christmas dinner, Harold looked around his table, no longer set for one, but for three people who had chosen love over lies, truth over manipulation, family over convenience. "Mrs." Chen raised her glass of wine in a toast. "To families that fight for each other, and to the truth that sets us free." "To second chances," Michael added. "And to fathers who never stop loving their children, even when their children forget how to love them back." "To Linda," Harold said quietly, "who would have been so proud to see her family come home." They clinked glasses as the Arizona sun set through the dining room windows, painting the walls the same golden color that had blessed every Christmas dinner in this house for the past 15 years. The table was fuller than it had been in months, and by tomorrow it would be fuller still. Jessica's plan had failed spectacularly. Instead of destroying Harold's family, her manipulations had ultimately revealed the unbreakable bonds that connected them. She had tried to weaponize their love against them, but love, real love, was stronger than her lies. As they shared Linda's traditional Christmas dinner, Harold realized that this was perhaps the most meaningful Christmas he'd ever experienced. Not because it was perfect, but because it had been earned through struggle, forgiveness, and the choice to fight for what mattered most. Epilogue. 6 months later, Harold stood in his backyard garden, planting tomatoes with his grandsons, while Amy and Robert argued good-naturedly about the best way to install the new irrigation system. Michael and his divorce attorney were inside, finalizing the last of the paperwork that would officially end his marriage to Jessica. The house was alive again with the sound of family, children playing, adults laughing, the comfortable chaos of people who belonged together. Jessica's attempts to turn Harold's home into a commodity had instead transformed it back into what it had always been meant to be, the heart of a family.